Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. If this is the first time that you've seen my face, my name is Alicia and I'm a second year politics and economics graduate? God, I wish. I am a second year politics and economics student at the London School of Economics. But today I am in a very good mood because I have an amazing video for you guys. I'm so excited for you to watch it, where I have interviewed a world-leading economist called Julian Jessop. He has 35 years experience in economics. He's worked in the city, he's worked in consultancy, and he's worked in the government sector as well. So he started off in the Treasury. He's also worked with prime ministers, the Lord Chancellor's department. He's just done so much and he has so much advice for you guys. If you're considering studying economics at A-level, at GCSE, at degree level, this video is for you. If you're doing an economics degree and you're considering a career as an economist, this video is for you. Yeah, I'm so excited. As always, please subscribe if you would like to see more careers content like Firstly, I just wanted to thank you for actually coming on, because I know that when I met you at the Institute of Economic Affairs this summer, which feels like it was so long ago now as well, I just knew that I had to get you on because I just felt like you had the capacity to inspire so much people, just not just me, especially when it comes to like bringing transparency to career paths in economics.
Yeah.
One of those, I feel like economics is one of those subjects that's just quite obscure. So that's why I really enjoyed your talk. But before we get into like the careers advice section of this video, which is the main part and tips that you give students, I was just thinking if we could go back to the start and talk about your early years. Yeah. So specifically with A-levels, did you actually study economics at A-level?
I didn't actually, but the main reason I didn't was actually my school didn't offer it. This was back in the 1980s when economics wasn't a widely taught subject at school.
Yeah.
So it wasn't unusual for economics not to be on the curriculum. I think now if economics was available, I probably would take it, or at least consider taking it.
Yeah.
But certainly back in the 1980s, it wasn't essential. As it happens, the A-levels I did do were mathematics, physics, and French, which happened to be the subjects I enjoyed most at O-level, what you probably now call GCSE.
Oh yeah, O-level, yeah. I did math.
Yeah, exactly.
Well. I was going to say then, no, because that's actually so true. Like you don't actually need to have economics at A-level to do it at university. So what advice would you give for students that don't have A-level economics who want to apply for an econ degree?
My general advice to people is to choose the subjects that you enjoy the most, regardless of what they may be. So in that sense, I think, in terms of A-level choices, go for whatever you enjoy the most. But there are some subjects that, if you're not doing A-level economics, are probably more relevant to an economics degree at university than others. So I think mathematics is important. It's not always necessary depending on the course that you're going for. But A-level mathematics, I think, is a good choice if you're going to do economics at A-level. But beyond that, I think it's pretty much an open field. There's lots of overlaps, for example, between economics and things like geography and history. I think they're good subjects to do at A-level and to make the most of if you're applying for economics at university, to try and draw the links between the two. So, for example, a lot of geography is social geography about people, and economics is a subject about people. I think history is a good one to bring out the common themes for as well, because a lot of economics is about repeating the same mistakes, seeing the same economic crises over and over again. And I think some people who are economists are quite bad at learning the lessons from history there. So I don't think it really matters what A-levels you do, but if you have done things like maths and history and geography, or politics as well, of course, then when you're applying for university, pull out the interesting aspects of those that you might think might be relevant to an economics course.
That's so true, because I did history A-level and I noticed that there was a lot of economic intersections there, because obviously you look at economic history too. I remember when I was in sixth form, I actually chose to study economics just because the teacher recommended it to me. So I actually didn't have any knowledge of what economics was. And I feel like that is very common for students in sixth form and at GCSE stage as well. And so I wanted to ask you, what would you actually say economics is? Because even when I get asked this question, it's such a broad question.
It's a fun because when you say economics, people don't quite know what you mean. They think you might be talking about money, for example, or or unemployment, or all sorts of other things. But I've got a slide here that I use in my presentations, and my definition of economics. Economics is about how people decide what to do with scarce resources, and the roles of markets, companies, and governments in making these decisions. So that sounds a quite sort of abstract and dry definition. But if you think about what scarce resources mean, that's things like the environment. We have limited number of all sorts of environmental things like clean air and so on. Scarce resources include time. What are we going to do with our time? Are we going to work or play or study? Money, again, what are we going to do with our money? Are we going to save it? Are we going to spend it? What are we going to spend it on? And all those questions are things that economists would have a view on. And if you look at the major shocks that have hit the UK economy, the global economy over the last few years, things like COVID, for example, there's a lot of interesting things that economists have to say about COVID. Everything about the value that you might place on a human life, to how do you pay for the massive increase in government spending that's been necessary to support the economy over this period. Brexit, again, another still a very, very hot topic. Lots of economics, good and bad, in that. The energy crisis. How do you deal with an energy price shock? Do you allow markets to work, or do you support companies and business and individuals who are struggling with their bills, or some combination of the two? So while ultimately economics sounds quite dry, it's actually all about our lives, our real lives, what we do with our time, our money, and all sorts of other really interesting things.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I feel like economics is almost studying everything that's going on at the moment and how things intersect. And I also think that even just studying economics is something important, that every student should have some sort of economic knowledge, because even if you don't then go on to become an economist, it just helps you understand how financial systems work more, and just the world around you. Like you mentioned, there's so many economic events going on at the moment. We actually have something in common, Julian. I don't know if you know this already, but we both applied for an economics degree at Cambridge. The only difference is that you got in and I didn't. So I wanted to ask you, because a lot of my viewers are applying to Cambridge to study economics. What would be your biggest tip for those viewers?
Okay, well, interestingly, I did get in, but only on my second attempt, interestingly. I tried to get in on what was then called fourth term entries. That was on the basis of an interview and my expected A-level results. Now, I was actually unsuccessful, but I tried again in what was then called seventh term entry, which is where you did a specific Cambridge entrance exam in economics. And, I clearly had a very, very good day, because that was a much better performance, and I did well at interview as well. The best general tip is to be as interesting as possible. And particularly if you're going to the interview, to say things that are almost deliberately controversial. You may be aware, some of you may have seen or studied a book called History Boys, and there's a very good film of it as well. Which is about getting boys, in this case, into difficult universities, and they're deliberately taught to be controversial, not necessarily to say things that you'd expect everybody to say, but to be sort of interesting. So to be interesting in interview, have controversial opinions. I think it's important to have one or two things that you stand out at, that again are interesting. Whatever it may be at the school that you are at, whether that's something interesting you're doing in the community, or the cadet force in the army, or the RAF, or whatever, something a bit interesting that marks you out. And it only has to be one or two things. It doesn't have to be a massive list of ridiculous achievements. That
I definitely agree with that. I'm even helping my little brother write his personal statement now, and I just keep telling him, just make sure that you stand out, because there's so many applications that they read. So I definitely agree.
And less is often more as well. I mean, I found this as an employer. You often get massively long CVs, 2, 3, 4 pages, with a 3-page covering letter. And there's really no point. People will form an opinion much more quickly than that. It's more important to have a few things that really stand out, that make you different and interesting, and the sort of person that a university lecturer would want to spend 3 years plus talking to and having discussions and arguments with.
Exactly, yeah, that's so true. And then why did you actually choose to study a degree in economics?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, originally, my main interest was politics. Actually, I brought up in quite a political family. We always had, the Radio 4 on in the background and listening to the Today programme and the breakfast news and that sort of thing. So it's very much a political household. So I was very interested in politics. But ironically, my father, who is a professor of sociology, actually one of the country's leading Marxist state theorists, said to me, "Don't do politics, do economics, because there's more money in it." So I understand where he was coming from. There's a big overlap between politics and economics, but the good thing about economics is that it sort of provides you lots more career options than simply doing politics would have done. And I would argue it's a better degree because it's a bit more grounded in how the world works necessarily than politics is. But there's clearly a lot of overlap between them. So I got into economics because of originally my interest in politics. The other really important appeal, though, to me of economics was that I was never particularly good at anything at school, but I was a good all-rounder. And I think that's one of the great things about economics. It's a great subject for all-rounders. You don't have to be a whiz necessarily at maths or history or geography. You can pull together different parts of that. And a good economist actually is an all-rounder anyway, because it's rather like maybe an analogy here, or being a GP in medicine. You need to be able to have a toolbox of skills that you can apply to lots of different problems, whether that's different patients presenting in a clinic or different economic problems. What sort of solution do you come up to it? So I like economics as a good all-rounder subject.
I agree with that, and I really like that phrase. I feel like I might steal it as well. It's really good. And then whilst you were at university, did you do any internships or spring weeks that related to your later career?
I didn't. Again, that might be a question of timing. Back in the 1980s, there was rather less of this than there probably is now. So my question on that point then, if you didn't do any experience, because a lot of students don't actually have relevant work experience as well, and then they get put off from applying for certain positions, but you don't actually need to have relevant work experience. I feel like it's how you draw experiences from the work experience that you do have. What would be your tips for applying for experience? Well, clearly work experience is nice to have, but there are other ways that you can demonstrate your skills. So, for example, you could be, treasurer of a student society of one type or another. You could be responsible for organising graduation balls or something. That sort of shows practical skills that I think a recruiter will be looking for. I don't think you necessarily need to spend a week on a desk in the city or something. I'd be more impressed by somebody who'd spent a couple of weeks working on a till in a supermarket, in terms of the customer experience you're getting, the responsibility that you're getting from that. So I think there's lots of different ways of getting experience that will appeal to a potential employer, and it's not just one size fits all model.
Definitely, that's really good. And then moving on to your master's degree before we get into the career section of the video, I particularly find these questions interesting because I'm considering doing a master's as well. And I just wondered if you thought your master's degree was worth it. And do you actually need a master's degree to become an economist, do you think?
Well, there are two ways of answering that. I mean, first of all, I haven't even used a lot of the economics I learned as an undergraduate. And in my case, the master's degree I did was actually very similar anyway to the advanced parts of the undergraduate degree I did. So I don't think you really need one. That said, a lot of employers do want one. So in a sense, you have to play the game, and employers will look for a master's degree. Many of the better employers, though, will actually sponsor you to do a master's degree. So you don't need to do a master's degree straight after your undergraduate degree. Which for many people would be prohibitively expensive anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So maybe look for employers who might sponsor you to do a master's degree. Actually, so one other thing, whether or not you need a master's degree also depends on the quality of your first degree. I think if you've got a very good first degree in economics, straight economics
Yeah.
from a relatively good university, I don't really think you need a master's degree. However, if you've got a mixed degree, economics and I don't know, zoology or something like that, then there's clearly better for you to have a master's degree than otherwise.
I agree with that, because that's why I'm considering doing an economics master's as well, because I'm a politics and economics undergraduate.
On the type of master's degree that you do, I think it might partly be a question of filling in the gaps that you've got. So, as you say, if you've done economics and politics, then you might want to do a master's degree that's a bit heavier in economics, and maybe if this is the direction you want to go in, to have more econometrics in it, for example. If you didn't do a lot of that at the undergraduate degree. On the other hand, if you've got a fairly solid all-round undergraduate economics degree, then I would consider doing something a bit different as your master's degree. Maybe specializing in something like health economics, for example,
or
labor economics.
Exactly.
Or economic history, I think, is a really good choice. So the master's gives you a chance to specialize in something that you may not have covered in depth when you were doing your undergraduate degree.
Yeah, that's very, very interesting. I remember what I was going to draw on from what you said. The fact that companies actually sponsor masters now is very interesting, because I do talk a lot about funding and scholarships on my channel, and I think firms are doing that increasingly. So it's definitely a good route to look into that not many people know about as well. So that's good.
I mean, so it works both ways. When on the one hand, they would prefer to have people who have master's degrees, but also they need to offer master's degrees to get the best candidates. Because the jobs market can be quite competitive on both ways. So lots of companies need to offer these sorts of benefits to attract the better candidates.
Definitely. And then I think you already kind of answered this question when you said that you don't use a lot of your economics from your undergrad, but was there anything that your degrees didn't actually prepare you for?
Well, I think certainly my degree gave me the academic background, but there's no real substitute, I think, for practical experience of applying economics to problems. And this, by the way, is, funny enough, one reason why I'm not keen on people doing PhDs, doing doctorates in economics. Very few employers of economists actually require a PhD. I mean, typically that's some of the academic institutions, some of the big US investment banks might look for a PhD. But generally speaking, my feeling is that you can actually spend too long at university doing economic theory and not enough learning how to apply economics in the real world to practical problems. So clearly, degree provides you with the basic tools, but it's learning how to apply those tools that makes all of the difference. And if I look over my career, there are certain parts of my career when it was basically a series of problem solving. Particularly my early years when I started work at the Treasury, but also when I was in the city and in consultancy. Looking at for example, economic data and thinking, well, what does this mean for the economy? What does it mean for financial markets? A lot of that was about taking the very basic principles that you learn at university, probably, 10 basic principles of economics maximum that you really need to understand. And most of them are about, the trade-offs between different options and how price mechanisms work and so on and so on. So once you've got those basic principles, a good economist is really about applying those principles to solve problems, and just as importantly, I think it's really important, communicating the answers to people who may not necessarily be economists and want to understand quickly what it is that they need to do or what the options are.
Yeah, exactly. So moving on to the career section of this video, one of the things that I've noticed of many economics graduates saying is that they often feel directionless coming out of university with an economics degree. So for yourself, coming out of 4 years of higher education, it would have been, what made you choose to become an economist?
Yeah, well, I personally think feeling a bit directionless is not actually necessarily a bad thing. I'm very skeptical of these people who have sort of 30-year career paths laid out. They're the sort of people that at the age of 12 decide they want to be world king at the age of 40 or 50. Those people are a bit weird. I think it's important to be flexible and just to let your career path take it where it will take you. I went into economics. Funny enough, actually, in the first 2 years at university, I didn't do very well. I was towards the bottom of the class, not because I was, not working hard or anything like that, but basically because of exam technique. I hadn't sussed how to work effectively.
Yeah.
So it wasn't until my third year that everything really clicked, and I was lucky enough to do very well in my final exams. But that meant actually I wasn't sure until pretty late in my undergraduate career what I wanted to do. And I thought, oh, actually, I've got a much better degree than I thought I was going to get, and that most people thought I would get. Yeah. So let's actually look seriously at being an economist. And my first role, actually, I went on a 1 year temporary position at the UK Treasury, so part of the Government Economic Service. It's only a 1 year role. Yeah. But I ended up staying there for a total of 5 years.
Yeah.
So even at that stage, I only had a 1 year plan, which was to work at the Treasury for a year and then see. And I think personally that's perfectly reasonable. Nobody really knows what it is that they want to do. You never really know how well you fit into a job until you actually do it. And then things change over time. I mean, a consistent theme in my career has been my sort of family commitments and other responsibilities, like paying a mortgage and so on. So the jobs that might suit you in your early 20s when you just come out of university, you might want to change track in your late 20s, 30s, 40s, or whatever. So I think being directionless isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Yeah.
Keep your options open. Be willing to change tack as you go along.
Well, that's really nice for me to hear, because when I before I got to the LSE, I was very adamant that I wanted to be a policymaker and I wanted to go into politics. And now I feel like the more experience that I've done, work experience into different sectors, I've realized I don't want to do that straight away after I graduate. So I'm looking at more like consulting, because it's broad and you get that broad exposure to different industries. And so I do feel quite directionless sometimes, but at the same time, like you said, it's actually a good thing to keep your options open, whereas before I was very, very closed off.
And I think it's very important to understand how the world of work has changed over the last few decades. I mean, certainly, my parents, it was perfectly normal for somebody to go into a job when they were 20 and work there till they retire. Now it's much more normal to have a almost sort of portfolio of different things that you do to change job, maybe even change career track every 5 years or so, to be much more flexible. It was interesting what you said about not being sure what part of economics you wanted to go into. I think I've worked in 4 or 5 different areas of economics over my career.
Which area?
I started in the civil service. I then worked in the city. I then actually went briefly back into the civil service in a different area, and then consultancy. More recently, I've been doing a portfolio of things, including teaching and sitting on investment committees in the city, and quite a lot of writing and broadcasting and a bit of policy work as well. So just keep your options open, and I'm not saying to follow your nose. Have a bit of a plan, a bit of an idea.
Yeah, exactly.
But don't map it out too precisely.
Yeah. That was one of the main things that I found interesting when I first met you actually at the IAA, is that you've actually got that exposure into, a government career path and then a corporate one when it comes to economics. And especially because, I do politics and econ as well, so I'm flopping between the two, I guess. And so I guess the next question following on from that is, what are the main differences that you notice between a government career in economics and a corporate one? Because I think it'd be interesting to get your inside perspective on the differences in like work cultures and actually capacities to have an impact.
Yeah, so I mean, every sort of option that I've taken has had pros and cons, and there are, I think, still quite big differences between working, for example, in the civil service or working as an economist in the financial sector, or an economist in consultancy. If I take the civil service first, I mean the pros are that it's a pretty decent working environment, unless you're really unlucky working directly for a minister who is going to throw salad at you. The chances are that it's a pretty friendly and constructive place to work, and it particularly suited me because my first proper job, apart from sort of summer jobs, was working in the civil service, and that I learned how the world of work, particularly office work, works. And civil service is pretty good at looking after people, so it's particularly open and friendly to graduates from minority backgrounds, and it offers a fair amount of quite decent training. So it's a sort of friendly, supportive place to work. You also get to work on really interesting stuff. Pretty much anything that's in the newspapers from day to day, there will be economists in the civil service working on that. So that can be really interesting. There are downsides to it. It can be quite frustrating because ultimately decisions are taken by politicians, and you may not have an enormous amount of influence on what those decisions are. You have to do what the government of the day says. You can also find yourself perhaps a bit pigeonholed sometimes. You can become the expert on something for 2 years, and really get on top of the subject, and then get knocked off into a different type of job and become an expert on something else, and then you don't necessarily get the sort of broad overview of experience that you might do with some other departments. The civil service also is obviously relatively bureaucratic, not massively well paid.
So that's a big thing that everyone talks about when they're asking me questions on Instagram, is the differences in salary between the two, in the civil service and your more corporate careers paths.
Yeah, I mean the gap is big, and in many ways actually getting bigger. But it partly depends on your stage in life. I think if you're a younger person starting out, then money probably shouldn't be your most important concern anyway. Yeah, it's only maybe a bit later, when you've got a family and a mortgage, that you start worrying about these things. And that was certainly my career path. I mean, when I was in the Treasury, I was earning, it was perfectly satisfactory income. But a lot of my friends at the time were leaving the civil service to go and work in the city. Yeah. And I must admit, I was partly seduced by tales of 5 Series BMWs and doubling your money overnight and all that sort of thing. But also starting to think, about family and buying a house and a mortgage and all that sort of thing. So that was one reason why I left the Treasury, was the money, frankly. The second point was, and this is a general problem with the civil service, is that it's not particularly dynamic because it's quite bureaucratic. It's a bit slow. It's not particularly exciting. I mean, nobody makes dramas about the civil service apart from comedies. Whereas you see lots of dramas about the city of London and even big business sometimes. So for a more sort of dynamic, exciting environment where you've got a chance of making better money, then something like the city would be better. But as I said earlier, pros and cons. I mean, the city is much more high pressured. The hours are it can be pretty tough. Potentially lots of travel. You're also not quite as respected as much as you might be in the civil service. In the civil service, people generally speaking are very nice to each other, and economists are regarded as part of the team. In some other parts of the world, like the City of London, economists are seen as sort of like a cost center. Why do we have economists? The economists are not making us any money. Particularly if you work on a trading floor, you've got to have a pretty thick skin to survive in that sort of environment. So it swings and roundabouts. A lot depends, I think, on personality type and maybe where you are in your life. I do really like that point about where you are in your life, because the thing that I like about your career path is that you started off in the Treasury and then you went to the city, but now you're actually doing like work with the IEA and the speakers for schools, so it's like you can still help out again in the end, because it's like you've made you've had your success and you've made your capital from the city. That's kind of what I want to do as well, so that's super interesting. There's a lot of effort being put in by various economists to developing options for people to help out in that way. So there's organizations like Speakers for Schools, another one called Pro Bono Economics, where professional economists donate their time to charities to help them basically bid for money from the government or from family trusts and that sort of thing. So I think there's a growing recognition of the importance of economists contributing to society in one way or another. I mean, I personally enjoy giving schools talks, preferably to state schools rather than posh private schools where all the dads are directors in the city anyway. But there's lots of ways that you can give back through economics. So
I started doing that as well. Actually, I started doing speeches for schools, so I'm going to have a look at speakers for schools. It seems really interesting.
Yeah.
But then, just to move on to the final section of this video, so some of my subscribers asked me some questions on Instagram, and they wanted some careers tips. And so someone asked, they said it's extremely competitive these days, and a degree in economics does not guarantee you an elite job as Chancellor of the Exchequer, or in your case, economic advisor at the Treasury. What would be your best advice for starting out a career in economics?
I think the important thing is to get a foot in the door of the sort of place that you want to work. So I think you phrased the question, you can't just walk into an elite job. I mean, nobody really walks into an elite job. What they do is start at the bottom and then become really useful in some way. They get noticed. So it might be that you could look at a consultancy firm, and perhaps you're not going to go in at the level that you really want to in a consultancy firm, but the important thing is to get the foot in the door. So you might be a junior research assistant, for example. Rubbish job. You basically spend your time drawing charts and doing research for somebody else who's doing all the exciting stuff, but you get your foot in the door, and that's the really important thing. And then if you're good at it, you can demonstrate your worth and be helpful to people. If I had a secret of my own success, it was I'm a very good number two, a sort of very good deputy. I'm very good at making the person who has the title chief economist or whatever, making them look good by being helpful. And then eventually I've done enough of these jobs, I became the chief economist myself. But I think that's the thing, to get your foot in the door and then be helpful, demonstrate your worth to the company, be the person that goes the extra mile, that comes up with the good ideas in meetings and that sort of thing. But the flip side of that is be willing to accept a job that perhaps isn't really the job that you want in order to get on.
Yeah, no, that's very true. Very inspiring as well. I also wanted to ask you, this is quite an interesting one. What does it take to become an economist, do you think? And what sort of, and what I mean by that is like, what sort of habits do you think good economists need to have and need to develop?
Well, it partly depends what sort of economics you're going into, but I would pick three things. One is an interest in problem solving. So if you think about a lot of what economics is, it's if we take the energy crisis, for example, energy bills are soaring. What are we going to do about it? And there are various solutions. You could, simply pay everybody's energy bill, but that could be enormously expensive and not encourage people to economize where they can. Or you could just let energy prices do what they will, but that's really hard on low-income households who can't afford to pay their bills. So what's the solution to that problem? It's some sort of middle ground. The second thing I think is really important is sort of curiosity, a willingness to do research. A lot of problems, frankly, are nothing new. We've had similar problems over and over again. So looking back at history, what's happened when you had similar shocks? What's worked best? What are other people around the world saying? So the ability to do research, find out what the existing state of knowledge is. And then the third thing I would say is communication skills. And that's communication skills in all sorts of ways. And obviously, an ability to express yourself verbally is important. But I'm also a big fan of charts. I hate equations. When people present me with an economics paper with 2-3 pages of equations, they lose me straight away. But if you can show me a good chart that maybe shows the relationship between two variables like economic growth or unemployment and the level of inflation, I think that's really interesting. If anybody wants to look at my Twitter feed, for example, it's quite easy to find. It's full of charts. Just trying to explain.
Yeah, it is.
And one of the great things about Twitter is, of course, you've only got maybe one chart and 240 characters to make a really good point.
That's
So
true.
they're my three things: an interest in problem solving, an ability to do research and think for yourself from first principles, and thirdly, communication, whether that's verbal or with pictures or whatever else it may be.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And then also, yeah, on that point about your Twitter, I do follow your Twitter as well. I'm going to put all your links in the description box below for the subscribers to check out, definitely. And then the final question, I do feel like you've touched on this already, but this is a final question of the video, and that is, how do you know if a career in economics is right for you?
You'll learn as you go along, frankly. I must say, but every single job I've done in the first couple of months, I thought this had been a ghastly mistake. And I still ended up staying for a number of years. But I mean, at the end of the day, you should do things that you enjoy. And if you find you don't enjoy what you're doing, it may not necessarily be because it's economics. I think it's actually more likely to be because of the place you're working rather than economics itself not being for you. So if you do find yourself struggling to do an economics role at one place, maybe that's just the wrong role. Maybe look for somewhere else where the pressures or the priorities or the people are different. But who knows? This comes back to the point about feeling a bit directionless. You never really know until you try it.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay, well, thank you so much, Julian. Thank you so much for your time. And
thank you,
I'm sure that everyone will find this extremely helpful, as I have. Thank you.
Thank you.
If you are watching this, please comment down below your career's aspiration. I'm really interested to know. I'll be replying to all of the comments like I do all the time. Also, comment if you have any other video suggestions, and if you like this style of video, give it a big thumbs up, subscribe so you don't miss out on future content, and I'll be back with another video next week. Thank you guys so much.